So I'm doing this crappy chat in person. It's going to be a little bit of a different video. So, today's video is an interesting topic I've been thinking about ever since I've gotten this Crane plumbing catalog from 1963. Why are there some toilets that are just superior while others are just inferior or just straight up a downgrade? Well, I got an interesting theory, so let's check it out. So this video is mostly going to be focusing on Crane plumbing commercial fixtures from the past, mostly between the 1930s up until maybe the circa early 1990s. But mostly focusing on the time period from like the 30s to like at least the 70s or so. A trend I've been noticing that mostly pertains to Crane is that most of their commercial fixtures are very hit or miss. And I've made this apparent before. Take for example the third generation Crane Santon toilet, which I think is a pretty awesome model. Good flushes, good bowl clearances, excellent performance, about as unstoppable as you can get for a toilet like this. A very solid model and one of the best Crane toilets ever made, in my personal opinion. Or you can also rely on the Crane Sanito, which in this case is basically just a 10-inch version of the second generation Crane Santon toilet. Good flush, good bowl clearance, great performance. Yet another great model. Then you also have the Whirlton, which in this case is the first generation. So, the first generation Walton I've only seen twice and I'm not very impressed with. I'm expecting it to be just as crappy if not worse than the second generation ones, and I didn't like those either. So this is where my theory comes in. Why are some models like the Santon and Sanito much better than something like the Whirlton? And this one should be very obvious, but some people may not think of it as a downside. It's the fact that they pretty much copied a model meant to flush straight down, redesigned it slightly, and then called it a day. They literally just ported the model over, did some slight changes, and that's it. That's all they really did. So something I've noticed with Crane Plumbing is that they really like to copy and paste their fixtures, slightly redesign it, and then call it a different model. That's essentially what the first generation Walton is. It's basically a downgraded Crane Santon from the second generation, or in this case a Sanito, which is meant to flush down straight, but they made it swirl. And then you wonder why copy and pasting a design, making it flush different, has so many different problems. Not just with bowl clearance, but the flush being worse as well, which you would think would be better compared to a straight down flush, but you would be surprised. This copy and paste method would be used by Crane Plumbing a lot with their commercial fixtures. You would not believe how many times it was done. Take for example the second generation Crane Walton toilet, where they basically took the third generation Santon, copied it over, angled the ramjets, and called it a day. And then you wonder why that thing has so many problems like terrible bowl clearance, the flush being worse and can't even siphon out most of the time, and even the performance being slightly downgraded. While I'm not saying the performance is terrible, it's actually one of its stronger suits, it's nowhere near as tough as a Santon. And then you wonder why so many of these toilets have so many problems when they take so many designs and lazily copy it over and lazily slightly change them without even really testing them further. That's not a good design method, and I promise you it makes these fixtures a lot worse than they could have been. Another example would be the first generation Walton versus the first generation Placidus. The Walton has been around since the late 1930s or so, and was a very solid model. Weirdly enough, the Placidus came a lot later, around like the late 1950s or early 1960s, and was yet another crappy downgrade. Literally the only difference is that they made the trapway opening smaller and angled the rim jets, from a toilet that was meant to flush straight down. So the Placidus ends up having the same exact problems as the Whirltons. The flush is a lot worse and doesn't even flush out most of the time. The bowl clearance is absolute crap, and even the performance is even downgraded because of the smaller trapway and the flushing style. This is an example of why you really should not copy a toilet from something that's supposed to flush straight down to a swirly toilet. That won't end up very good, and look what happened. The Placidus ends up being a downgrade, and the Walton ends up being an upgrade. The funny thing is the inverse problem happened in the late 1960s when they redesigned both of these toilets to their second generation. The Placidus was meant to be more of a swirly toilet that time and was actually focused on better compared to its first generation. But the Waltons seemed like an afterthought. They just copied the Placidus design over, made it flush straight down, and that was that. So you could tell by the second generation they actually had the Placidus in mind to actually be a swirly toilet, and then the Walton was an afterthought, and therefore the Walton ended up being a joke. I've legit only seen a few of these, and I've seen one that had like a small bit of toilet paper in it, and it couldn't even take that. That just shows you why you shouldn't copy a design that was meant to swirl to flush straight down, as we discussed with copying a straight down flushing toilet to make it swirl. It doesn't end well. So what I've learned here is that copying and pasting fixtures to flush one way and flush another way is not a very good idea. That's why the Placidus ends up being a downgrade to the Walton, and the Walton ends up being a downgrade to the Santons. Just copying and pasting fixtures, calling it a different model, and slightly redesigning them does not help them out at all. It makes them far inferior to their original models. And that's what I've learned here. Well, that's my personal theory. What do you guys think? Do you think this theory has any merit, or do you think there's something else going on? Let me know in the comments below.